Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we've got something really special. We're digging into a fascinating collection of sources, personal notes, journal entries, observations, all dated October 17th, but spanning nearly 30 years, from 1997 right up to 2024.
Yeah, it gives us this incredible snapshot, a real cross-section of how things have shifted
Yeah.
culturally, politically, philosophically.
Exactly. It's like a time lapse of thought.
And our mission here really is to see how collective thinking evolves.
Mhm.
How do ideas actually spread? How does human nature react when things get stressful? And why does our optimism, especially about tech, sometimes, well, backfire?
We're connecting the dots between memes, music, politics, based on these very personal, dated insights.
It's about finding the patterns, the constants, underneath all the surface noise.
Okay, let's dive in. Where better to start than how thought itself becomes, well, contagious?
Right. The earliest note we have on this, from 97, really dives into ideas from books like Thought Contagion. And it makes this really sharp observation about how ideas or memes actually take root.
Oh.
It seems they only really thrive in two very specific environments. Either you need sufficient uncontested conformity, basically everyone agrees, no questions asked,
Total consensus.
or the complete opposite, where collective thought is totally subverted. When people are just desperate for any new way to think because the old ways have collapsed.
That's quite a contrast. Stability or total chaos, nothing in between.
Apparently not for maximum meme uptake, according to this source.
Yeah.
And the 2024 notes build on this.
Yeah.
They talk about the mechanism of spread, calling it the Trojan horse method.
Ah, okay. I think I can guess where this is going.
Yeah, it's pretty intuitive. It's not just about repeating an idea, it's sneaky. The Observer describes it like this. You grab someone's attention with one maybe appealing or harmless-seeming idea. That's your horse.
Get your foot in the door.
Exactly. But hidden inside, you've packed a whole bundle of other ideas, maybe less related, maybe more extreme. You use that initial hook to bypass critical thinking by hitting what the notes call instinctive buttons.
Like tribalism, fear.
Precisely. Fear of outsiders, loyalty, the appeal of easy answers. The hook is easy, but the payload, ideologically speaking, can be significant.
So this leads the sources down a pretty interesting theoretical path. Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance. That seems like a leap.
It does at first glance, yeah. Sheldrake, for anyone unfamiliar, proposed these non-physical fields influencing biological systems. But the journal entry here explicitly poses the question, what if politics is a kind of morphic field?
Okay. How would that work?
Well, if established ideas and habits create a field that influences future behavior, maybe across time and space, does that explain why certain political patterns, like, say, intense toxicity, seem so stuck?
Like a field of expectation was created years ago and now we're just stuck in it.
That's the idea the source floats, that maybe a critical mass achieved consensus on a certain way of doing politics, and that created a self-sustaining field.
Which implies just arguing facts won't change it because you're fighting the field itself, not just opinions.
Exactly. You're wrestling with this invisible structure of collective belief. It's a really challenging thought.
Okay, so if thought itself can be contagious, almost like a field,
Yeah.
how does that play out in culture? Specifically, how does culture react to freedom versus, say, oppression?
Well, the 2001 entry gives a fantastic example. The revival of Russian folk music after the Soviet Union collapsed.
Right.
Under communism, you had this enforced monoculture. Oppression meant monolithic tastes. The Observer notes indigenous music, even simple things like shepherd's flute tunes, just disappeared from public life, banned or suppressed.
The freedom arrives
And boom,
Yeah.
the first wave is just this torrent of options, mostly Western pop music flooding in. Understandable?
right, the forbidden fruit.
But here's the interesting part the Observer highlights. It took about 10 years, a whole decade, for Russians to really start rediscovering and embracing their own traditional or world music.
Huh. So genuine diversity isn't just flicking a switch. It needs time to breathe, to be rediscovered internally.
Seems so. It needed that period of digestion, maybe. And this leads to a kind of paradox noted in the journal. Even in places with freedom, like the U.S., there's still immense pressure toward common tastes. Peer pressure, market forces.
Conformity finds a way, even without state control.
It does.
Yeah.
But the source holds on to this optimistic note. Ultimately, folk ideas always prevail because they're grounded in something real, something resilient in human experience.
But that idea faces a challenge now, doesn't it? The 2024 note brings up AI.
Yes, this is a fascinating twist. The Observer worries that with younger musicians using generative AI, well, world music or folk traditions might stop being an influence in the old sense.
Because nothing's being inhaled, as the source puts it.
Exactly. If you don't have to listen deeply, travel, learn from someone, live it. If you could just type, give me a traditional two-van throat singing sample. What does that do to the idea of influence?
It changes the meaning of the word itself.
Totally. It becomes less about human connection and transmission and more about algorithmically generated context. The observer seems worried that this could fracture that resilient folk memory we were just talking about.
Can AI really deliver authentic cultural weight? The source sounds skeptical.
Very skeptical. It questions if that digital Trojan horse can carry real cultural meaning.
Let's shift gears a bit, from culture to the political climate. These notes track a long arc of, well, toxicity.
Yeah, it's pretty stark. The sources actually pinpoint the shift towards really intense personalized negativity starting around 1993. The argument is that when the Clintons took office, the political air turned acidic almost immediately because, as the note says, they were demonized from the get-go.
So that marked the start of a trend. Personal attacks over policy.
That's the observation. It became the dominant mode. And this cynicism was apparently so ingrained that by the 2004 election cycle, the Observer saw something almost desperate happening.
What was that?
They call them smile campaigns. It sounds absurd, but the note says just weeks before the election, both Bush and Kerry's campaigns, after tearing each other down for ages, suddenly pivoted to just beaming, hoping voters would be swayed by white teeth alone.
Wow. A superficial fix for a deep problem.
Pretty much. A kind of dark humor there, maybe, but the underlying issue noted is serious. This toxic climate is repeatedly linked in the sources to threats or fears of political violence.
How so?
Back in 2004, the Observer recorded fears that if John Kerry won, some conservative right-wing fanatics might actually stage terrorist attacks, maybe like Oklahoma City. That was a documented concern then.
And fast forward to today.
And the 2024 entry makes the chilling point that 20 years later, that fear of violence if one side doesn't win, it hasn't gone away. The threat landscape, in terms of potential political violence tied to elections, is seen as unchanged.
Which leads the Observer to conclude
that today, democracy itself is on the line. Now, we're just reporting what's in these notes, the level of concern expressed at that time.
Understood. So what keeps this toxic pattern locked in place for decades, according to the sources?
It comes down to a fundamental human thing, what the notes call sunk costs and beliefs. Basically, it's incredibly hard for people to admit they were wrong.
Right. Once you've invested your identity, your time, your social standing in a belief, backing down feels like losing everything.
Exactly. That psychological investment, the sunk cost, is immense. The Observer concludes that most people will not admit error, probably won't even admit doubt, and that this is likely a constant feature of human civilization.
Our attachment to our beliefs outweighs almost everything else. It keeps that morphic field of toxicity charged, perhaps.
That seems to be the connection the source is making, yeah.
Okay, so if people are that resistant to changing their minds, even when faced with contradictory evidence, what happens when reality delivers a blow so massive it can't be ignored, like a major disaster? This brings us to the calamity effect.
Yeah, and before we get to the collective response, the sources touch on the individual level, how we cope using compartmentalization.
How do you mean?
The 2021 entry uses the example of Eric Clapton, someone associated with 60s counterculture, psychedelics, then revealed as a strong anti-vaxxer during the pandemic.
Right, that caused a stir.
And the Observer's takeaway was, you have to shift gears. You can't assume someone progressive on one issue won't hold completely contradictory, maybe conspiratorial views on another. People contain multitudes, including these sealed-off compartments.
We can't expect ideological purity even in people we admire.
Pretty much. And that individual complexity scales up during mass crises. The sources reference the culture of calamity in the 1906 San Francisco earthquake.
Okay.
Right after the quake, there was this brief, amazing period. The source calls it the Woodstock effect. Suddenly, class, race, all the divisions seemed to melt away. Just human hearts facing a shared loss.
A moment of pure empathy. Sounds incredible.
Incredible, but incredibly brief. The key finding, it lasted maybe 48 to 72 hours, tops.
That's disappointingly short. What happened then?
Then the Observer notes, the old hierarchy snapped right back into place. The upper classes started asserting privilege again. Self-interest returned. It perfectly illustrates an equation cited in the notes from Robert Ardrey. Amity equals enmity plus hazard.
So friendliness only exists when there's shared danger from an enemy or a hazard.
Essentially, yes. People unite only when facing that immediate shared threat. As soon as the direct fear recedes, the default setting seems to be, well, selfishness and division returning. The unity is fleeting, the friction is constant.
Wow. And the sources connect this to how we consume disasters now.
Yeah, there's a sharp critique. Disaster fascination is called a type of porn. And it draws a parallel between the old Coney Island effect, where people would flock to see disaster sites as a kind of morbid spectacle.
Like entertainment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the modern experience of watching YouTube videos of genuine human suffering, maybe from a war or a natural disaster, only to have it interrupted by completely unrelated, cheerful ads.
Ugh. Yeah, the commercialization of tragedy.
It underscores how quickly that brief Woodstock effect, that moment of potential compassion, gets co-opted and redirected back towards consumerism and detachment.
Okay, so we've seen individual rigidity, fleeting unity. This leads us to the idea of panaceas, right? The things we hope will fix everything, technologically or otherwise, and how they often fail.
Precisely. Let's start with the psychedelic paradox, as the 2021 notes call it.
What's the paradox?
It's the selling point versus the reality. Psychedelics were, and are, often promoted as this potential panacea, a way to rewire the brain, make us kinder, more connected, maybe less politically polarized.
The hope was for a kind of mass mellowing.
Something like that. But the observer's blunt assessment is, look around. It obviously hasn't worked. The continued toxicity, the political deadlock, the individual examples of compartmentalization like Clapton, it suggests that a substance alone can't just override these deep-seated cultural and psychological patterns.
And there's a practical problem noted too, isn't there, about scaling these things up?
Yes, a crucial point about folk medicine versus industry. The romantic idea is often small-scale natural solutions. But if you actually want to provide something like psychedelics as a panacea to millions, you need massive industrial production, corporate structures, regulation.
Which kind of kills the whole natural folk remedy vibe.
Exactly. The scale needed for a panacea inherently contradicts the ethos it's often sold with. The Observer even notes that folk medicine has been industrial since the 70s anyway, so the dichotomies may be a bit false.
It's a complex picture. And speaking of health, there's a very specific personal note in the sources about illness that predates recent events.
That's right, a fascinating detail. The Observer mentions experiencing symptoms very much like long COVID, including anosmia, losing their sense of smell for nearly a year, but way back in 1993-94.
Wow. Long before COVID was a household name.
Yeah. It serves as this little anchor, doesn't it? A reminder that widespread, weird, debilitating health issues aren't entirely new. Our current tech maybe amplifies the anxiety or spreads the information differently, but the underlying vulnerability is perhaps more constant.
Which connects to the failure of technological panaceas the sources bring up Susan Sontag.
Right, her idea of the heroism of vision. This
Yeah.
is that early optimistic belief about media technology. Think Twitter during the Arab Spring. The idea was that these tools would inherently spread democracy, empower the little guy, make society better.
We definitely heard a lot of that hope.
We did. But the Observer's later reflection is stark.
Yeah.
Backfired. The same tech that fueled revolutions could be, and was, just as easily used by authoritarians, propagandists, extremists.
So putting blind faith in tech to fix fundamentally human problems, risky.
Very risky is the conclusion here. And that brings us to a final point from the 2024 notes, this idea of the New Age conflation.
What does that mean?
It means the internet has sort of thrown everything into one giant blender. The Observer notes that the New Age movement, which used to be somewhat distinct, is now just conflated with everything else online. And this makes anyone expressing spiritual or alternative ideas an easy target.
How so?
The source uses Marianne Williamson as the prime example. It notes when she discussed standard visualization techniques, critics immediately jumped to label it dark side stuff. She herself apparently connected this kind of attack to the misogyny she faced during her political campaigns, being caricatured as crazy or mean.
So it's not about debating the ideas anymore.
Not according to this observation. It's about using the internet to caricature and dismiss, especially women, to ensure they aren't taken seriously. It's described as a form of social attack rather than intellectual engagement.
Looking back across all these notes, all these years, it really doesn't feel like a straight line, does it? More like twists and turns, repeating patterns.
Absolutely. Which makes the mention of Benoit Mandelbrot's death in 2010 feel very fitting.
The father of fractal geometry.
Right. And he famously described his own career path as a very crooked line, a fractal line.
And that feels like a metaphor for everything we've just discussed. These cultural shifts, political cycles. They aren't linear. They're complex, jagged, with patterns repeating at different scales.
That seems to be the insight. The fact that the same kinds of political toxicity, the same limits of human empathy, the same failure modes of our solutions seem to reappear decade after decade, despite all the changes. It suggests we're looking at something like a behavioral fractal.
So, reflecting on all this, what's the key takeaway for you listening to this? It seems to be that the fundamental issues haven't changed much.
That's a big part of it. The Trojan horse method, the way influence works, the failure of easy fixes, whether chemical or technological, the deep human resistance to admitting doubt or error.
These things seem constant, right? The technology changes the delivery system, maybe speeds it up, widens the reach, but the core psychological and social dynamics, they persist.
That persistent tension, the oscillation between wanting to conform and looking out for number one, seems to be the engine driving a lot of this recurring chaos.
Okay, here's a final thought for you to chew on, drawn directly from these decades of observation. A 2010 entry speculates about a possible future where affluent suburbs might eventually become gated hamlets.
Like literally surrounded by moats, turning into separate feudal territories.
That's the image floated, entirely separate from the more chaotic city centers. Now, given everything we've seen in these notes, the persistence of self-interest, the documented failures of unity, that very short shelf life of the Woodstock effect,
You have to wonder.
is that where this path leads? Is the logical, maybe fractal endpoint of our current polarization the formation of these little independent, self-interested kingdoms? Could that be the future? Something to think about.